10 game weeks of the Premier League have now been and gone, so we should have an idea what we're talking about now. Let's see if we can use it to improve our draft teams. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 11. And Game Week 10 brought some very interesting results. At one point I thought we could see Arsenal, City and Liverpool all losing, but Liverpool managed to turn their game around. I'm sure it was probably mentioned in some of the coverage, but I don't remember the last time we would have had both Arsenal and City losing on the same day in the Premier League. Probably not for a few years now. Makes the title race a lot more interesting. Liverpool certainly having a right old sniff of that now. Elsewhere, we have seen Forest move up into the Champions League places, and you have to say, after 10 game weeks, very deservedly so, a 3-0 victory over 10-man West Ham, who are not a very good team to watch through the opening 10 weeks, and Lopetegui definitely someone whose neck is going to be on the block sooner rather than later if the results do not turn around. Nice to see Spurs get a good, solid, probably slightly over-egged 4-1 win over Villa on Sunday. And then Monday Night Football, whilst it was a pretty dreary affair for pretty much 90 minutes, all got very exciting at the end with a Harry Wilson double, 2 cracking goals to steal all 3 points for Fulham. And as I said, we've now got 10 game weeks worth of data to back up what we are doing and what we're saying about players now. We're not just having to rely on speculation on what they did last year, but kind of have a pretty good idea how most of these teams are shaping up, how the lineups are shaping up, who's performing, and who, as it stands, are really not filling up to their potential that we gave them on draft day. A quick technical note, you'll know that I generally use 8-team leagues because that is by far and away the most common league size that exists in the draft FPL universe. But at this stage of the season, a lot of the numbers start to quite clearly become skewed by leagues that aren't as active as they probably were heading into Game Week 1. So after the international break, I'll be moving those to either 9 or 10 team league data. Haven't quite decided which one yet. Probably 10 team leagues, which tend to be far more active and so give us a far better idea of those roster percentage stats. I think if you are in a very engaged 8-team league, I think the engaged stats from 10-team leagues will probably be far more relevant to you. Though I get that even in those very active leagues, some of the players that are going to be available in your waiver piles will still be a lot better than those available in 10-team leagues. But I think that will just generally steer the podcast and the predictions and the picks a lot better moving forward. So just a small point, that won't apply until after the international break. Now, I'm recording this episode on Wednesday the 6th of November, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then, and of course, subject to change. As is typical at this time of year, there are lots of cup games going on, European Cup games going on this midweek, some even going on as I speak now. I think Villa's game kicked off over an hour ago, and we've also got Arsenal playing later today as well. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include Matheus Nunes, Tsimikas, Ismail Assar, plus we've got the draft duel and all the rest, so let's get straight into it. Now, before we get into the meat and veg of this episode, another reminder that our 1-month free trial code is still very much up and running. If you use the code DFCFree24, you'll get free, unlimited access to everything that the normal members get for a full month. So you can kind of try before you buy. After that, this is applicable if you sign up on a standard monthly recurring subscription. After that, it'll be $3.99 a month. But if you want to have a look at what we've got, say all of the stats that you see me use, all completely available to members. We've still got lots to come this season. And, for those of you that already signed up, still lots of things we're trying to get out ASAP that I think are going to really excite you. So let's kick things off with Waiver Watch, using some of that data we have at Draft FC to see who the players that were coming in and out were ahead of Game Week 10. So the players coming in, we had Iwobi, Aït-Nouri, Michael Keane, Ashley Young, Sells, Neto, Matheus Nunes, Jorginho Rutter, and Luca Digne. So fairly mixed bag, but I can sort of understand most of those moves. The players making way, we had Jadon Sancho, interesting. John Duran, another one who I wouldn't be parting with in too much hurry. Cole Walker, Dunk, Calafiori, Nketiah, a few managers starting to get a bit bored of his lack of returns. Van de Ven, Doku, and Collins. So fairly reasonable of outs there, apart from those top two, which are quite interesting. A quick look at some key injuries and suspensions as we head into Game Week 11. Calafiori is going to be out until after the international break with a knee injury. Matty Cash came off injured in that game against Spurs with a calf injury. He's not in the squad for their Champions League game tonight, and he's another one that I would expect we don't see again until after the international break. Eze, we've got confirmation he's going to be out for a few more weeks at least. Konate, at the time of putting this together, was potentially going to be out with a hand injury. He played yesterday in the Champions League. He's absolutely fine. Diaz for City, not quite sure what's going on with him, but the news is that he's not going to be seen again before the international break. And then for Spurs, Van de Ven is on there. He's got a hamstring injury, which will rule him out until after the international break. Richarlison came off with another hamstring injury for him. Again, we haven't got firm news, but I wouldn't expect to see him back in a hurry. And the other one that, again, I should have probably added on to here is Romero, who came off in that Spurs game with some sort of a foot injury. It looked like a bit of a contact injury, but he was in quite a lot of pain. And he must have been to come off when the game was poised like it was. So Spurs potentially heading into Game Week 11 with both their first choice centre-backs out. Let's move towards the main picks. I've got quite a few defenders to talk about this week. Some of them we can probably kind of ring fence within their teams. So let's start with the Everton defence. Now, last week, you might remember, Ashley Young was down in hidden gem territory. His ownership has crept up, and so they're now all up above 10%. Now, they're away to West Ham this week, which is by no means a bad game to roll into for Everton, and I fully expect Jared Branthwaite to be back into the squad for this one. I've seen lots of messages and people having doubts about that. Of course, we just saw, Michael Keane. It was a popular pickup last week, but I am 99% confident Keane will be back on the bench at the weekend and Branthwaite will be back in the 11. Then got a home game against Brentford after the international break, which is also pretty attractive, as well as a home game against Wolves in Game Week 14. After which, we will all be lobbing them back into the waiver pile before their terrible run of fixtures into December. Now, I've only got Gahey on here because a couple of the others are still in hidden gem territory, but the Crystal Palace defence is another one that I'm still fairly high on. Great attacking performance as a bunch in that game against Wolves. Chalobah and Gahey getting goals and Munoz getting an assist. Say, another good matchup this week against Fulham, and I'm sure that the likes of Chalobah and Lacroix will escape hidden gem territory very soon. The Wolves defence, as I said last week, despite the great fixture run, I still don't back them to keep a clean sheet against anyone, and that includes this week's opponents, Southampton, who have scored themselves the fewest goals in the league with just 7 so far this season. This is backed up by the opposing stat that Wolves have conceded the most goals so far through 10 games with 27, so averaging 2.7, nearly 3 goals per game, which in itself is a marker of, it's very much a marker of relegation form. And that needs to improve dramatically if they are going to remain in the league. So in essence, we have the worst attack versus the worst defence. Should be a cracker. Either way, if you're looking for a Wolves defender, Aït-Nouri remains the standout for his attacking potential in what is and continues to be a very long, drawn-out audition before he gets a move to one of the Champions League teams in the summer. A few more to discuss. The United defence, I think the new manager bounce coming and the game at home to Leicester this week will see a lot of moves for United defenders. A word of caution though, Leicester last week continued their record of scoring in every Premier League game so far. So while a game against Leicester on paper looks good, no defender so far has come up against them and walked away with your bog standard clean sheet 6-pointer. So I think if you're bringing in any of these guys, it needs to be with a slightly longer term view than just the weekend, because then they go away to Ipswich and then have a home game against Everton in Game Week 13. There are trips to Arsenal and City on the horizon, but around that is generally quite a nice run up until New Year, and I'm sure many will hold on the bench during those difficult fixtures anyway. I've personally ended up with De Ligt in both of my main draft teams, and I like him for his goal threat. I would have said I preferred Dalot up until last week, but with a Shaw return on the horizon, and that really bad open goal miss, I'm quite happy to stick with De Ligt, and my second choice at the moment would be Mazraoui. And then the final one to mention is Tsimikas. Now, I do have to point out now and again on the pod that mentions does not equal an endorsement. If there's going to be a proper swap around of a player at a position, it generally means that someone has to play 2 in a row in order to break up the midweek, weekend back and forth pattern that can easily emerge. So we saw that with Robertson last week, and the expectation was realised with a league start then for Tsimikas. The issue, though, is that we then saw Tsimikas start and play pretty much a whole game yesterday in the Champions League, which means he's now played 2 games in a row. And so the odds that he could potentially play 3 in a row become slightly less likely for me. So for me, it devalues both of them, as I think we could continue to see this rotation move forwards over the season. So, I don't think we're ever going to have total assurance that if one plays midweek, the other plays at the weekend. And as it stands, despite everyone bringing in Tsimikas and being quite hot on him starting last weekend, with him having played 2 in a row now, my money would potentially be on Robertson coming back in, but it's very much a 50-50 choice at the moment. And I know lots of Liverpool fans are still saying that Tsimikas has been performing head and shoulders above Robertson this season. And maybe the fact that he came off slightly before the end of that match yesterday would indicate that he could play 3 in a row. I think the thing to point out generally as well, it's not as straightforward as, we see it all the time. If a player plays in midweek, it does not mean they're not going to play at the weekend. And likewise, certain players will play weekend, midweek for a number of weeks in a row if needs must. I think the thing we've got to remember is that the mileage that goes into a footballer's legs is not just what you see on the pitch for 90 minutes on match day. They're putting far more miles into their legs during the various training sessions that they're doing during the week. And so it can easily be adjusted now. I mean, these players are getting monitored digitally with all sorts of tech that they wear to know exactly how much effort they've been putting in during every single training session. So, if someone does play weekend, midweek, and needs to play at the weekend again, they simply just tune down the intensity of their training in the days leading up to it. It's not that hard in 2024, and it just means it's slightly more harder for us as FPL managers to reliably know who's going to play and who's going to get rested. In midfield, McNeil, his ownership is pretty good, 67%. Remains, I think, the main one to have if you're looking for an Everton attacker. I've highlighted Doku and Savio. I'll come on to the predicted lineups in some detail at the end of this episode because I haven't done that for a little while. You'll see that I'm not entirely sure where Manchester City are heading at the moment in terms of their starting 11. And then Hudson-Odoi playing in that Champions League calibre attack that Forest have with Chris Wood at the spearhead. He's crept out of hidden gem territory now with 13% ownership. I quite like the matchup at home to Newcastle. I think that, it could be another game in which Forest get quite a lot of joy. I expect both teams to score in that one, but another one where I'd actually be backing Forest to get another 3 points on the board and continue marching on. And then exactly the same 3 attackers that I mentioned on last week's pod. I think in terms of the ones that are realistically available to you in an average size league, these guys very much remain the standout, and Dye for Everton, Delap for Ipswich, and Strand Larsen for Wolves. So let's get into Draft Duel. So last time we did De Bruyne and Odegaard as a bit more of a premium battle, bringing it slightly back down to earth this week and trying to come up with a couple of players. In fact, both players we've already mentioned who are high up on the wavered in list ahead of Game Week 10. And I know will be popular again this week. I've already seen a little bit of chat touching on these players in kind of individual situations in the Draft FC Discord server. It reminds me, if you do use that code DFC324 and become a signed up member, you will also find within the members area a button that lets you join the Discord server where we have our little inner sanctum of draft geniuses to, and that's not me, that's not talking about me, just the Draft FC members in there helping each other out, and you could be part of that crew too. Two interesting players. One who I'd say is very much kind of on the up, and the other one we're reasonably familiar with, and that is Matheus Nunes and Pedro Neto for Chelsea. Now, at first glance, you'd be going, Neto is far and away better than Nunes. It's really just a question of perspective and what time frame you're measuring things over, which we'll come on to at the end. But let's get into some of the numbers. I think the key thing to point out straight away is the draft value in these two players. So Neto, average draft position was 87th overall. Now, at that point in time, and for a lot of the summer, he was still a Wolves player. So, his valuation changed, obviously, after he moved to Chelsea, for better or worse. We weren't really sure at the time, but I think in hindsight, possibly for the better. And Matheus Nunes was generally undrafted. He doesn't have an average draft rank in 8-team leagues, just wasn't really on the radar for draft day, and not someone that was on my radar at all. In terms of current ownership, both are on the up, as we saw during Waiver Watch. Nunes hitting 29% in 10-team leagues, and Neto just creeping over the 50% mark to 54% in 10-team leagues himself. Now, in terms of minutes, last season Neto got around 1,500, Nunes just over 600. Not a huge number at all. Now, Nunes, for me, is one of the most improved players that I've seen, in terms of just with my eyes, passing the eye test, one of the most improved players that I've seen all season. His spot in the team has come due to a string of injuries City have had in attack, but he's done well with the opportunities that he's been afforded, and he's made 13 appearances so far and got 7 attacking returns during that time. So just shy, if we put it on a minutes ratio, just shy of an attacking return every 90 minutes. Now, only 2 of those returns have come in the league, but he's only had 200 league minutes. With Foden and KDB both sort of waiting to grab this season by the scruff of the neck, a very poor early showing from Gundogan, and say Doku's form faltering a little bit with injuries, it's been pretty fertile ground for him to prove his worth. And I have to admit, having seen him a bit, I didn't realise how quick the combination of speed and strength that he possesses, and he can certainly do a job on the left wing as well as centrally if asked to go back to his sort of more preferred number 8 position. Now, you'll see that his attacking output has historically been pretty underwhelming. If we look at his non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90, last season's was 0.32, was actually a career best, though obviously from a quite limited sample size. If we compare that to this season, I haven't put it on the table, but currently that figure stands at 0.63. The numbers primarily lie in expected assists rather than goals, but the numbers equalise a bit if you take into account the cup appearances too. As always, and I'm going to sound like a scratch record, whenever we do draft duel, whenever we analyse players like this, minutes is key. It always is. In the short term, with City's overall form as poor as it is, and really as poor as it's been in the Pep Guardiola era, and that's not just off the back of 3 defeats in a row, the performances generally haven't quite been up to scratch, even when they have got the results. I think Pep will continue to play the players who are in form, and Nunes currently fits that bill. I also think in the search for a system that covers the huge hole that Rodri leaves in midfield, that Nunes' abilities definitely can become a lot more desirable, and so just open up the door for him to play a bit more centrally as well as out wide. Now, on to Neto, one of the many Chelsea attackers good enough to start for most Premier League teams, who can easily find himself benched any given week. So far in the league, he's played 465 minutes, which is just over half the 900 available through 10 matches. So far, we've seen Sancho probably emerge as the more preferred option off the left wing, though due to injury and the fact that he couldn't play against United last week, we've seen Neto start and finish the last 2 league games. Last season's 1,500 league minutes was just the second time in his career that he's managed more than 1,000 minutes in a league campaign. Such has been the impact of his injuries, and that remains a big red flag on his file even to this day. We know how fragile those legs are, and he really relies on that explosivity and that acceleration, which you need to be 100% for. His expecting goal involvements per 90 so far in the current season sits around 0.4, so based on historical averages and last season's form, probably we should expect a bit of an increase in that output. Now, if he carries on as he is, injury-free, I've put him down for around 2,000 minutes. Factoring in, there's probably going to be the odd muscle strain and a bit of rotation. The fact that Sancho is back available this week actually doesn't worry me too much, as I think Mudeki's recent form could see the pair line up on opposing flanks from the start of the game very soon. On Mudeki, he's shot 27 times so far this season for a total XG of just 2.5, which means, in essence, he's shooting too much. Less than half are on target. And if you look at some of the data on FBref, they have a lovely column headed non-penalty XG per shot. Madejski's is currently 0.09 XG per shot, which currently ranks him 98th in the Premier League. So, as an unrelated point, Johan Visser currently leads that stat with 0.3, having scored 5 goals from just 13 shots, which makes him the most efficient marksman so far. Now, we have to be careful with stats like this. They're interesting, but from an FPL perspective, those numbers, in a direct sense, are completely irrelevant. I mean, I don't care if Madejski scores 1 in 11 shots, because if he's taking 12 shots a game and he scores every week, then he's an excellent FPL asset. But in the context of trying to work out minutes and work out who's starting, that is not really sustainable for a player that's going to keep getting starts when he keeps squandering attacks in that fashion. That's the other way to look at that. A shot off target or a poorly taken shot from, not the best position, that could have been a full minute of build-up play, a number of passes, runs, all sorts of good movement. And if it ends in a player just, whacking it over the bar from 25 yards from an angle that they're going to score, 1 in 100 times, it's not going to be sustainable. I mean, he started 9 league games on the bounce, so he's obviously pretty highly rated and he does look good sometimes, but here I am basically predicting he could get benched very soon. I think the fact that Sancho may not be 100% will keep him in this week, but as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Sancho and Neto line up together sooner rather than later. So in terms of a verdict, if we were just looking at this weekend and nothing else, if you're in a fairly smallish league and you're just looking for someone to rotate in for the week, Núñez would be my preferred target. If we're looking at medium term, if we're looking at the rest of the season, I'd still much prefer Neto. As I say, the big red flag is that expected minutes of 2,000 could quite quickly go down to half that if he picks up another injury, which he does at a fairly reliable rate. For 10-team leagues, as I say, last week, both had an almost identical pickup rate of around 18-19%, and say both have decent availability still across a lot of league sizes. So let's go through some hidden gems very quickly. In defence, I'm not going to cover these. I've already talked about the Crystal Palace defence, but as I said, Chalobah and the Cross still have huge potential to be picked up there in a lot of leagues if you fancy a bit of the Palace defence. In terms of midfielders, Elliot Anderson is an interesting one. If we look at the last few games, he is right up there in the league in terms of non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90, with quite a silly number of 1, which, if we just saw since the start of October, that's 4th in the Premier League behind Raul Jimenez, Haaland and Saka. And most of that is coming from expected assists, and a lot of that, of course, is due to the presence of Chris Wood. Now, the fixtures do get a bit more rocky up to Christmas for Forest, and I highly doubt they'll still be in the top 6 as we enter the new year. But it's certainly helpful to put this marker down early when some even had them to get relegated this season. They're far from that. And Anderson has looked really exciting when he's on the pitch. The only doubt is that he didn't start the last match against West Ham, but did come on as a substitute. The other one who I think is quite interesting is Ismail Assar. Should play at least the next game again with Eze's injury. He's 13th in the league when it comes to shots on target per 90, a smidge more than Eze actually. And in terms of Palace regulars, he leads the way in my trusty non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 with 0.61, which is very healthy after nearly 400 minutes. Less healthy, though, is the solitary assist so far to show for it. Consider him firmly in the list of due a return any game now. Someone I think will be quite overlooked and a waiver you could comfortably place quite low down in your list, knowing that you'll probably still be able to pick him up anyway and prioritise some others that could be a little more wanted. You could also apply the same logic to Elliot Anderson. I doubt he's going to be very high on people's radars, so if you did want him, you could easily stick him as quite a low waiver priority and still pick him up. And then Archer remains the only sort of striker I'd consider in hidden gem territory. So I quite like the matchup for Southampton against Wolves this week. Anyone that mentions Adam Armstrong in the comments is getting blocked. Now, most hidden gem pick this week. We've already talked about one Sarr. Let's talk about another one, and that's Pape Matar for Spurs. His ownership is just 5% in 16-team leagues. He's appeared in every Premier League game this season, 3 starts and 7 off the bench. His non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 is very close to the 0.5, which means we'd expect him to get a return pretty much 1 in 2 games, which for a draft asset, and particularly for a draft asset in a large league, in a large 16-team league, is very healthy indeed. So just 2 assists in the Premier League so far, but does have 3 goals from his 5 cup appearances as well. Next game against Ipswich at home, I do expect him to start. He's been one of the best performers, a real engine in that midfield over recent weeks. And yeah, definitely a decent option, even if just looking at for this week, if you're in one of the larger leagues. Now, you probably see every now and again the pod just seems a little bit longer when you have a look on YouTube or have a look at how many minutes you've got whilst you're out on your commute or on your dog walk listening to me. Usually because I rabbit on about the predicted lineups. So I'm going to do that again for you this week. I've just updated them around an hour ago before I came on to record. Of course, as I said, still a lot subject to change with the European fixtures going on as we speak, and a whole load of them still to come tomorrow on Thursday. So I will, of course, update these right up until the main game week deadline. But let's have a cut across to the Draft FC website and have a look at them. So this is available on the Draft FC site. The predicted lineups are there and available to all members of the public, whether you are a signed up member or not. Of course, for those who are members, get a slightly jazzier version of these in the dashboard, which overlays a lot of your league data over them so you can see quickly who is available and who is not. But anyway, let's start at the top. So Arsenal have a trip to Inter to get through tonight. So I'll have a look in there after this, who they're lining up with. We've seen Trossard and Martinelli play together recently, with Partey dropping back. I think for this one, they should be able to field a normal back four. And so one of those two I expect will miss out with a midfield three of Rice, Merino and Partey. I'm expecting Martinelli to start over Trossard because he seems to be in a bit better form, and I think Arsenal need to try and nurture him back to that good form that he showed a couple of seasons ago. For Villa, the centre-backs are going to be the main headache now with Mings back fit. However, I doubt many of us will be too bothered about choosing one ahead of a trip to Anfield. They do have a decent run after the international break though, so we'll have to see if we've got a bit more clarity heading into game week 12. Moving forward, I would guess, especially with Cash's injury, that Konsa gets pushed over to right back, and we see Mings and Pau Torres at the back. Diego Carlos, from what I've seen of him, just doesn't really impress me. They just seem to look really shaky whenever he comes in. For Bournemouth, I expect Kepa Arrizabalaga to come back in. If Dango is still unfit, then Kluivert should continue on. The rest are fairly steady. The only one that's a bit more of a coin toss is at right back. Still not 100% there between Smith and Araujo. But despite Smith's sort of shortcomings, they just look a lot more solid with him in there. So, and of course, Araujo came off got hooked after about 30 minutes in game week 9 against Villa, which isn't a very good look. So, yeah, gone with Smith in there for now. For Brentford, a relatively settled first 11 now, though we do have to see if they make any changes after that late collapse against Fulham. Aya was obviously missing, and I'm sure will come back in if he's fit. For Brighton, if Dunk remains out, that should be a fairly predictable back line, but nobody really cares going into a match against City. Ayari is a slight injury flag, otherwise Belieber would come back in for him. Don't see much changes elsewhere. For Chelsea, again, fairly settled. Sancho sounds like he's not quite 100%, so he could be there, he could not be there. I doubt they'll risk him, to be honest. Given the other options they've got available at any point in the season, I don't know why they would risk someone like Sancho if he wasn't 100% fit. As I said earlier, it may not be long before we see Sancho potentially line up where Madeki is on the opposite flank with Neto there too, with Jackson and Palmer, both mainstays in there. The interesting one, obviously, over the recent weeks as well, is that Lavia's kind of emerged very much as a preferred option over Enzo Fernandez, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. For Palace, given the injuries in midfield, a fairly easy team to predict. I mean, they've accumulated quite a few over the last couple of weeks. Eze's out, Hughes, Lerma, Wharton, all out until after the international break and possibly beyond, which leaves Chet Doucouré as really the only out-and-out senior central midfield player that they still have available. We did see Kamada go in there as a double pivot last week, so I fully expect him to go in there again in that deeper lying role. Because of that, I think it really makes it quite easy to predict that Sarr, Mateta and Nketiah will be in the front three again for their match at home to Fulham. For Everton, as already said, I fully expect Branthwaite to come back in. The only other one that's been a bit of a topsy-turvy is Lindstrom against Harrison. That's probably the only coin toss for me. Gone with Harrison in there for now. On to Fulham. who really are one of the most consistent 11s we've had in the Premier League this season, with rotation really only being through necessity by injury or suspension. We are, of course, coming off the back of Harry Wilson's heroics off the bench to score 2 late goals and take all 3 points. Is that enough for him to earn a start? If it's not, I don't know what is. But I also don't know I'm not quite sure who he'd come out for. I've currently put him in for Nelson, who started over Adama on Monday night. I could see, definitely see Raul up top with Iwobi and Wilson flanking. Andreas did come off with a bit of an injury, but I've not heard anything to suggest that was anything bad. He could, of course, go in like for him. We'll have to see. I think it'd be nice for Wilson to get a start after that performance, but I would also, be fair play if they just went with their consistent starting 11 again and he came on as a substitute, as he has done the last few games. But for now, I've got him penciled in for a start. For Ipswich, I think Ipswich are one of the teams that we predicted a full correct 11 last weekend. This week, Phillips is suspended, so I'm not quite sure how you say his name, but Kajust, I would expect to come in. Otherwise, I'm predicting the same, but would not be surprised at all if Jack Clark or Wes Burns got a start, such is the rotation that they do in attack. As a little personal aside, I've just got back from a few days in Suffolk for a little getaway, and I now find myself rooting for the Tractor Boys because honestly, those Suffolk folk do not have a lot else going on. For Leicester, defensively, Cooper is trying out some new combos. We haven't really seen the same back four in consecutive games now for a little while. In attack, I've left it as it is, but we could easily see Jordan Ayew or El Khanous come in. But I say I'm sticking with this for now. For Liverpool, not much to write about there. I've currently got Tsimikas still in there because it just feels typical that everyone goes and switches back to Robertson and he just plays 3 in a row. We'll see. We'll see what the kind of news is, what the press conference info is before deadline. Any murmurings that would suggest it's Robertson, and I'll take him out. For City, this is probably the most clueless I've felt about the City lineup for quite a while, and that's mainly because I don't quite know what the fitness, not the injury, but the fitness status is for some of these guys that have missed some game time. I know Doku's probably the main disruptor here that could come into that 11. He did get some minutes off the bench yesterday in the Champions League. Could play over Nunes. Nunes could drop a bit deeper and they both play. I've got Lewis in there. Walker could quite easily play. They don't often play together, but we have seen them both play together at times this season. Yeah, it's tricky. There's a lot of ways they could go with this, and for whatever reason, the likes of Foden and De Bruyne aren't quite up to it, aren't quite fully fit. I'm not quite sure. Keep an eye on that over the next 48 hours. I expect I could fiddle around with that a little bit more. For United, gone with what their standard 11 currently is. Although obviously we're going to fully expect potentially a change of system when Amorim comes in proper. For Newcastle, Barnes remains in the dark, and Howe will do anything to not start him with Gordon. So without an out-and-out right-sided option, I think we could see Joe Linton come in again as a more advanced player. Obviously, they got a very positive result doing that against Arsenal, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see that again. For Forest, a fairly consistent starting 11 all season. The main rotation has been in midfield. Now, since Ward-Prowse has been out, Dominguez has largely deputised, and he's done very well. They've got 5 players, essentially, for 3 spots, who've all got their own qualities, all in reasonable form. I don't believe Ward-Prowse gets straight back into this team. I believe Yates is performing in the 6 role probably too well to drop at the moment. So that leaves, if we discount Ward-Prowse, that leaves Gibbs-White, Anderson and Dominguez to fill the remaining 2 slots. It's one of those good headaches for the manager. Not a lot for me to base it on, but I'm fairly sure Gibbs-White starts again, which means it's a toss-up between Anderson and Dominguez. Now, purely for the reason that there is a little bit of expected narrative on the line here with Anderson returning to St James's Park. I've got him in there, but we will see. And then finally, for Southampton, I've pretty much just copied and pasted the team that they went into last week with. They got their first win from it, so they'll probably go with that team again. I think it matches up quite well with Wolves, and I could easily see Southampton following that up with their second win on the bounce. Lallana is apparently a bit of a doubt, so if he's not there, we could see Dibbling or Rebo come back in, but otherwise I think that's largely going to be the squad. For Spurs, it's mainly about the centre-backs. It looks like it could be Dragusin and Ben Davies coming in as, Van der Ven and Romero both potentially out. Due to the lack of height, I would expect another start for Bentancur in the 6, which means most likely another game that James Maddison will start on the bench. That isn't 100% nailed at all. I would not be surprised to see Maddison line up in the starting 11. We know Kulusevski's going to start. We know Johnson will start, and Solanke and Sonne fit. So it comes down to, a couple of minor toss-ups there between Sarr and Maddison and Bentancur and Bissouma, but I'm pretty confident it's going to be Kulusevski, Bentancur and Sarr as shown. There is a Europa game tomorrow, so if there's anything that comes of that could sway it, then I will update. West Ham, another shoddy performance against Forest. The disrespect towards Souček continues. I don't know if him and the manager don't get on. I know there's been some beef between Mohamed Kudus and the manager, which I'm sure was only improved by his now 5-game ban that's just been extended today. They did go with a change of shape in that game against Forest. They went with the back 3, which, if it works, it looks genius. But when it doesn't, it just looks desperate, because I don't really think they've got the squad to line up in that way. Lopetegui remains one loss away from getting his P45. Alvarez was the one that got sent off, so he'll be out. So currently I don't see the 11 deviating too far from what you see on the screen now. And then finally Wolves, again, they're not going to change too much. There's one or two that could change there, but we pretty much know how they're going to set up. There has been some, there was a question in the Discord about Johnston, what the goalkeeper situation is. I think he just wasn't quite 100%, and Sarr's obviously a pretty good backup, if not number 1 caliber goalkeeper for the Premier League. But I expect Johnston to come back in to goal for Wolves this weekend. So that is it for this episode. A reminder, the waiver deadline will process at the slightly later time at 1:30 UK time on Friday the 8th of November. That's because there is no early kickoff on Saturday, but there is a Saturday night game. I don't have it in front of me now, so I can't quite remember who that is, but there's a late kickoff, not an early kickoff. So the main game week deadline will be slightly later too, at lunchtime on Saturday the 9th. So for those of you that get that little last minute panic that you've missed the waiver deadline, you will have a few hours reprieve this weekend. A final reminder to go and sign up for those of you that haven't done before. Use the code DFCFree24 to get a standard monthly subscription absolutely free for a month, as well as all the stuff we have on offer on the site. As said, you will get access to the Discord server and that amazing flourishing community that we have building within there. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Make sure you click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. If this isn't your first time to the channel and you haven't clicked the subscribe button, then what are you doing? Make sure you click it. Give us a thumbs up if you like it. For those listening on the audio, also make sure you're following on whichever podcast platform you're listening to, so again, you don't miss out on any future episodes as soon as they arrive in your phones, computers, and wherever else you listen to them. So most of my kind of online presence now can be quite nicely focused to the Discord server, but I would also, if you're active on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now X, you can also get hold of us on there at draft_FC. I know some of you still DM me on there for bits and bobs, which I'm still very much responsive to. But as I said, most of my undivided attention exists for the members on the Discord. So best of luck ahead of game week 11. As I said, league tables, head-to-head matchups, records, all starting to shake up a little bit now. So make sure you are making the moves you need to make. Don't make the moves that you don't need to make. And as always, stay sure.